Welcome to this explainer. It's wild how a tiny misunderstanding can just snowball into an absolute disaster, right? Well, today we're unpacking one of the most tragic examples of exactly that in all of Tolkien's mythos, the Ruin of Doriath. We're setting the stage for a story that isn't really about massive armies clashing on a battlefield. It's actually about how pride, unimaginable grief, and the heavy, corrupting weight of cursed artifacts triggered a fatal chain reaction. It's a story that brought down a mighty elven kingdom, literally from the inside out.
Okay, let's dive right into this explainer with a cry of just pure, raw anguish. This bitter, desperate shout comes from a man named Húrin. Picture him standing completely alone in the wilderness, rejected and broken, crying out to an old elven ally. But here is the absolute tragedy of it. He's essentially screaming into the void, completely unaware that Morgoth's spies are listening in. And with this single heartbroken plea, Húrin unwittingly reveals the general location of the hidden city of Gondolin to the enemy, setting our entire tragedy into motion.
Now, to really grasp what happens next, we need to clearly define what the Ruin of Doriath actually was, because we shouldn't just look at this as some dry, historical military event. It's a deeply human, deeply emotional story, It's about how grief makes former allies lash out at one another, and how ancient oaths can completely ruin future generations. The fall of Doriath is basically your classic, devastating domino effect.
And to help us navigate this incredibly dense lore, we're going to follow a clear line of cause and effect across the 5 dominoes of Doriath's fall. We've got Morgoth's walking curse, a bitter gift to Doriath, pride, greed, and murder, the curse claims the makers, and finally, the final slaying of Doriath.
So let's start with domino number 1, Morgoth's walking curse.
The destruction of an elven kingdom actually begins with a calculated psychological move. Morgoth decides to release Húrin from captivity. Think about this. After 28 agonizing years chained up in Angband, being force-fed twisted visions of his family's suffering, Húrin is finally released in year 29. He's this grim, white-haired man carrying a black staff. But instead of a joyful, triumphant return, his own people shun him. They actually believe he's in league with Morgoth. So he becomes this walking curse, and his manipulated freedom brings disaster wherever he goes.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the immense, just heartbreaking emotional weight it carries. This is the stark reunion between Húrin and his wife Morwen. He finds her gray, old, and broken at the grave of their children, just sitting there beside the stone of the hapless. They share only a few tragic words before she actually passes away holding his hand as the sun sets. And when she dies, Húrin's heart basically turns to stone. All that grief completely morphs into a blinding, unreasoning anger.
Which leads us straight to domino number 2, a bitter gift to Doriath.
With his family gone, Húrin's compounded grief turns into a blind rage, and it's aimed right at the allies who harbored his family. Driven completely by vengeance, he travels to the dragon-ravaged ruins of Nargothrond, slays Mim the petty dwarf, and out of all that immense wealth sitting there, he takes just one single artifact, the Nauglamír. This beautiful, ancient necklace is going to become the physical anchor for all the doom that's about to unfold.
Húrin takes this priceless treasure all the way to the elven realm of Doriath, stands right before King Thingol, and violently throws it at his feet, shouting, "Receive thou thy fee for thy fair keeping of my children and my wife." It is such a devastating, bitter, and honestly, completely unjust insult. Húrin is essentially accusing Thingol of failing his family, which is a lie fueled entirely by Morgoth's lingering deceit. Fortunately for everyone, Queen Melian is there. With her divine wisdom, she pierces right through Morgoth's deceit, telling Húrin that he's seeing everything crookedly through the enemy's eyes. And hearing her words, the spell is finally broken. Húrin realizes the awful truth of how deeply he's been manipulated. Utterly defeated, he picks up the necklace, hands it respectfully to Thingol as a final memorial, and just leaves Doriath. Bereft of all purpose, the mightiest warrior of men casts himself into the western sea. But sadly, the damage is already done. The cursed necklace is now firmly in King Thingol's possession.
Which brings us to domino number 3, pride, greed, and murder.
So, the crucial point here is that the story shifts from Húrin directly to the artifact he left behind. What we get is a toxic, explosive mixture of 2 opposing flaws. On one side, you have King Thingol's haughty pride. He's become totally obsessed with the Silmaril, to the point where he commissions visiting dwarven craftsmen to set it into the Nauglamír. But on the other side, you have the dwarves' sudden greed. When they combine the greatest work of elves with the greatest work of dwarves, the resulting beauty is just overwhelming. Consumed by this violent lust for the gems, the dwarves decide they just aren't going to give it back. When the dwarves try to claim the necklace using a super flimsy pretext, Thingol doesn't even try to de-escalate the situation. Instead, completely blinded by his own arrogance, he delivers a devastating insult. He literally says, "How do ye of uncouth race dare to demand aught of me, Thingol, whose life began by the waters of Cuiviénen, years uncounted ere the fathers of the stunted people awoke?" He actually calls them uncouth and stunted, treating master craftsmen with absolute contempt right there in his own deep smithies.
Let's walk through this rapid, brutal sequence. Thingol commissions the work. The dwarves finish the masterpiece, but withhold it. Thingol responds with the shameful, racist insults we just talked about. And then, the breaking point. Enraged by his words, the dwarves rise up and murder King Thingol right there in the deep places of his own realm. Just like that, a king is dead, an ancient alliance is completely shattered, and the dwarven assassins flee eastwards with the Nauglamír and the Silmaril.
And that triggers domino number 4. The curse claims the makers. And this brilliantly illustrates how the death of the king doesn't just cause a political crisis, it fundamentally alters the magical defenses of the realm itself. See, for ages, Doriath was protected by the girdle of Melian. This was a divine barrier of magic maintained by the queen, making the kingdom an impenetrable sanctuary against the evils outside. But with Thingol dead, Melian is just overcome with grief. She vanishes, passing back over the sea. The very second she leaves, the girdle falls. The magic fades, the rivers speak with a different voice, and Doriath is suddenly laid bare, entirely exposed to its enemies.
The fallout from this is immediate, and it is brutal. The dwarves of Nauglamír, furious over the deaths of their escaping assassins, march a massive army back into the now unprotected Doriath. The elven captains, who are mourning and practically hopeless without their king and queen, are easily overcome. A grievous, bloody battle ruins the Thousand Caves. The great captain Moblung is slain, and the necklace is plundered all over again. But this cycle of vengeance, it doesn't stop there. Beren, who is Thingol's son-in-law, actually ambushes the dwarves on their march home, slaughters them with the green elves, and reclaims the blood-soaked treasure.
Now we've reached the 5th and final domino, the final slaying of Doriath.
So, this cursed treasure now passes to a brand new generation. Just look at the bloody journey of this one single artifact. It was forged in Nargothrond, claimed from a dragon's hoard by the shattered Húrin, gifted to the haughty Thingol, stolen by the dwarves who murdered him, reclaimed in a bloody ambush by Beren, and finally inherited by Thingol's grandson Dior. Every single hand that has held the Nauglamír has faced unimaginable tragedy, and now Dior is holding it.
Initially, Dior actually does quite well. He relocates to Morgoth and starts restoring Doriath's glory from the ashes. But Dior has inherited his grandfather's pride. When Beren and Luthien pass away, he receives the Nauglamír and chooses to proudly clasp it around his neck, openly flaunting the Silmaril. He either doesn't realize or just arrogantly ignores that rumors spread fast. Word reaches the wandering sons of Fëanor, who are bound by a terrible magical oath to reclaim the Silmaril by any means necessary. Dior's pride basically awakens a sleeping dragon. The sons of Fëanor send a demand for their jewel. Dior, lost in his hubris, ignores them entirely. And so, the sons launch a surprise winter assault right on the Thousand Caves. What follows is horrifying. It's known as the Second Kinslaying. This isn't orcs attacking, it's elf slaughtering elf in a horrific internal tragedy. The carnage is absolute. 3 of the sons of Fëanor are killed, but so is Dior and so is his wife Nimloth. Their young sons are left to starve in the woods. Dior's daughter Elwing barely manages to escape to the sea with the Silmaril, but the great kingdom of Doriath is destroyed forever.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer today, leaving us with a really profound question. Did Morgoth actually destroy Doriath, or did the elves and dwarves destroy it themselves through their own greed and pride? I mean, sure, Morgoth set that first domino in motion with Húrin, but it was Thingol's arrogance, the dwarves' lust, and Dior's pride that actually swung the swords. It is such a masterful portrait of free will versus manipulation. Think about that as we wrap up today's deep dive. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll catch you in the next one.